All right, in this video, I want to go over some of the additional tests that we can do. So in the lab, I have a certain set of sort of required techniques that we're going to do. DSC, density, tensile testing, and XRD. But there are additional testing that can be helpful in the identification and characterization of your various polymers. So these are not necessarily something that everybody has to do, but some groups will get added benefit from an additional test if you are having trouble identifying it or telling the difference between multiple polymers. And so some of the options, there are some limited cases where we can do TGA. If that's something that you think will help in terms of knowing the mass as a function of temperature, then that can be an option for groups. Also, we have some other ones that we can sort of look into. We've done tensile testing, but if you would like to do hardness testing, obviously that's something that we can very straightforward do in the lab. Contact angle, adhesion. These are pieces we don't necessarily have in our lab, but there are other ways that we can get some of these additional properties. So along with those, I have sort of a list of what I call improvised tests. And so these are things that we could do in the lab, not necessarily following an ASTM standard exactly, but coming up with our own sort of test to get the relative properties of materials. And so some of these would obviously be beneficial to have in the lab. So I'll try to highlight the differences of things that you could do in the lab if you come in for an in-person session. Or I've also tried to get some options there if you don't have the ability to come into the lab, but would still like to try something kind of at home. And so these are kind of improvised tests. You're not going to be able to compare these values to literature values, but you will be able to compare relative quantities, and also if you need standards of particular polymers to compare to, I can give you those standards as well to kind of have a standard for that test. So this is kind of my list of improvised tests. The first one we've done a couple times in the past is more or less a friction test, right? So this is something that you might recognize from statics. So basically, your polymer is going to be the substrate that you can move at a various angle. And so you're basically making a wedge. And you put some type of weight on top of that polymer, and then you keep adjusting the angle until that weight slips. And so this could definitely be done at home. You can see here that the students that have actually found apps that measure angle. You can also just take pictures and evaluate the angle afterwards in something like ImageJ. So there's options to measure the angle here. So really what you need is something to measure angle, either your smartphone or ImageJ. And you need a piece of your polymer, and then you need some weight. We actually just used a really odd piece of metal that was flat to do this test, and we basically just measured the angle at which it started to slip, and we used that as a comparison tool. So they measured their unknown polymers and then measured some standards that I gave them and compared those values, and were able to get relative friction values because some polymers are used for their sort of slippery or low friction behavior. So that's one option if you have if you think there's some differences in the surface texture. This could be a useful test for your polymer. Next is contact angle. So there are ways to do contact angle, there are machines that will do this for you. Goniometers will do this, and some labs have this. But also, we can kind of make a makeshift version of this if we have some way to drop a specific amount of water in a droplet onto your cleaned material, and then basically take a picture side on and where you can get a really good view of the contact. So sometimes your smartphone camera isn't enough for this, but you can definitely try it. Also, the lighting can be a little tricky. So here you might see this glow in the back. So this is us adding a lot of light to be able to get a really good image of the droplet. So the limitation here in the past for this, so again, we have a piece of the polymer unknown, a little droplet of water, and then the camera setup here. And so the limitation in this in the past has usually been the camera. So if you don't have a really nice camera at home, you could definitely still try this. But if you're not getting good results, we could potentially do this in the lab setup. And we can even investigate using somebody else's lab for this if contact angle. So contact angle is measuring the hydrophobicity. And so if that's something that separates the polymers that you're have narrowed your unknowns to, then we could definitely try this contact angle. We've gotten some good relative values in the past. And again, once you've got that picture, we can measure the contact angle with software that we already have, such as MSE. The last one, so again, contact angle, this is something that is probably best in the lab, but you can give it a shot at home and see what happens. Friction test, this is definitely something that I think you can do at home if need be, but we can do this in the lab as well. And the last one here, this is something that, solubility test, we can do home versions of this, but you're going to have limited chemicals. So the main one I can think of is acetone. So nail polish remover is predominantly acetone. There are different formulas, so you have to kind of watch out for that. But if there are certain solubilities for your unknown polymers that you'd like to test, this is you in limited cases you'll be able to do this at home. Otherwise, you'll have to let me know what chemicals you need, and we'll do this in the fume hood in the lab. So this is something that could potentially be done at home, but kind of in limited cases. And so we kind of need to think through this. So all these tests, and again, you can think of other ones as well. These are options that we have if you're finding it difficult to tell the difference between certain polymers, or you just need that extra one test to be able to say this is that, as opposed to the other polymer. And so all of these things are things that we can do. You will want to think about it a little in advance to make sure that we have chemicals, for example, for the solubility, or make sure that we have the setup for some of these other tests. So these are just some of the options. And again, we do have some additional instrumentation that we can try, but it is not required. So all of these are additional things that you might want to think about for polymer characterization for this third lab.